Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Thanks, sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. I was on Jeremy Lee's Sports Card Live a week and a half ago. I really enjoyed that. First guest on, honored to do that, responding to some of the previous episodes where shill bidding was discussed, and I wanted to add my 2 cents face-to-face with him and for his listeners. This is just pulling out to the first portion. It's a 3.5-hour program, but this is 15 minutes, mainly of me, but a little bit of interaction with Jeremy and Joe and Chris Hoge. So hope you enjoy, but it's always better to get the original thing watching it live. So I enjoyed it. I hope you do too. When people say shill bidding, it means different things to different people. And most people think of the worst possible situation, which is somebody bidding up their own stuff without any intention really even to pay, but just to goose up the second high bidder so that they can either sell their card for more or they can establish a new level of comp for maybe they have another copy of the card. Everybody is against that. That's not right. That's defrauding anybody involved in the bidding. Mastro, who's confessed to this, went to prison, and Doug Allen, those guys, they actually were able to see the max bids in the auction house and to place some bids to push it up to the max. That's also illegal, as evidenced by the punishment fitting the crime. But those are offensive kinds of shill bidding on the high end. And it really wreaks havoc with the comps because all of a sudden you get a false comp. And the shill group, because it's sometimes more than one person, is delighted if they bumped up comps to have a perceived comp that's much higher because they propped it up. Okay. I'm totally against any of this offensive shill bidding. And then sometimes they'll renege anyway. They didn't even want to win. They wanted to push up the second person. But if they accidentally won, they want to renege. And then you ban them and they just come back with a different name, the different user ID. So that's insidious. I hate that. But what I wanted to talk about is the other side of it is the defensive kinds of shill bidding. You got into that a little bit. If the item is misdescribed, misspelled, I've actually used some consigners for some friends of mine in some estate kinds of things. I'm a pro bono consultant, so I'm not doing anything except helping them. And so I've placed some nice cards with many of the auction houses and had conversations with several of them. Look, it's not my card. It's my friend's card. And they don't go, oh, sure. They realize it. And I put them in contact with the person. I'm the kind of the unpaid agent to get it to a consigner. In one case, though, I gave a card to a consigner that was outside their wheelhouse, and they did a poor job. And I'm sitting there thinking, I encouraged my friend to put this card there. They have not promoted it properly. It's going for way lower. I had a dilemma. That auctioneer, to compound the problem, said, nope, there's nothing you could do. I had another situation where there was a misspelling. I contacted the service. It's a well-known, I'm not going to say their names. And he said, look, if it's not your card, you can bid. I said, but I'm the one that mailed it to you. He said, yeah, but the check's going to the other guy. I know, we talked about this. They aren't your cards. In fact, if you wanted something for your own collection, there's nothing wrong with that. It's completely above board. If people ask me, we had this conversation, I'm not going to have no comment. I'll explain the whole thing that this was not a shill. So the defensive is to protect my friend, and sometimes it's to protect yourself. And there's so many solutions to this that are proxy. And the proxy stuff is probably undetectable because you don't give it to your wife that has your same last name. You give it to somebody or you create an alter ego or something. And so I think you can get away with it if it's not suspicious bidding activity. And again, I'm talking about defensive, so it's not propping up the price. It's going for less than half what everybody thinks it's worth. But for whatever reason, nobody's seeing it. It's quite a bargain. And I'm thinking, gee, I would buy that myself. But I'm hesitant because there's reputational damage and all that stuff. So I don't think that's nearly as bad. It still may not be kosher, but it's not nearly as bad to do things like that. And just proxy stuff can go bad. I could have situations where there was $1,000 card. It never got above 500. And I thought, gosh, I think he's got $500 in it. Do I need to protect him? Was that a shill? On the other hand, if I called a friend and said, hey, buy that card, it's going to go for $500. It's worth $1,000. Then that's not shill bidding. And then he wins it for $500. And then I called him up later and I said, hey, that's great. Thank you so much. And he said, well, thank you. I love having this card in my collection. Wait a minute. I thought you were going to buy it and then I was going to buy it back from you because I'm trying to protect my friend. And he goes, oh, no, I thought about it. Really, it's a great price. I was going to have it. There's no honor among thieves. Okay. Yeah. So, and not that he could extort me. Now, I never did this, but I'm just hypothetically saying that if you turn somebody on to a good deal that you just happen to know about because you were the consignor, then they could say, I'll take it from here and I'm good to go. Then maybe he'd put it on a different auction that had greater visibility and got the maximum price. Okay. So who is damaged by this? Where is the harm? If it's criminal, the person can go to jail. If it's civil, who's the plaintiff? Who's saying you wronged me? Now, it could be the underbidder in this over thing. But who's harmed when it's defensive shill? When I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't go for a steal or the auctioneer wouldn't let me pull it out. What am I going to do? I can't bid. If I call a friend, that's shilling too. So I'm just miserable here. But who is damaged? My thesis is the damage on both sides. Anybody who is relying on unedited comps is damaged. If the comp is artificially low, because of an inappropriate, poor, mislisted auction that went for way low than it should have. And we know what cards should go for. Or the traditional shill bidding, the offensive, very heinous, puffing something up. Either one of those puts an unrealistic, improper comp. If you just go straight to eBay and see what it sold for, you may be fooled. And that version of that came up with the Paul Skeens card. Is that a true comp for what a collector would pay for that card when it was not bought by a collector? It was bought, as Chris says, with a hefty dose of marketing spend for the corporate entity that bought that. It doesn't just mess up that card. It messes up the ecosystem and the ripple effect that Card Ladder has done such a great job on. If you throw that data in there, it makes all the other Skeens cards look either undervalued or that particular one is overvalued, which is what I believe. I lived in that space back in the 70s and the 80s. We were doing price guides. Really, even then it was about comps. Now, it wasn't digital comps. It wasn't scraping eBay that much. It was going to the shows, talking to the dealers, being in the LCSs and things like that, and seeing firsthand what it was selling for and what it wasn't selling for. So comps were a big part of it. We didn't call it that. It was just sales data. And where I went beyond that, we also looked at what wasn't selling or something that was visibly, readily available for sale at a listed price and passed by at a huge show. And nobody the whole weekend touched it. That is where I got off the rails with Mr. Mint. Mr. Mint said, I make the market. I control all the 52s from the find. If I say I'm selling them for this, then that is the market. End of story. So that's not the end of story, Al. I go to shows and I see them available in the same condition. And some of them are ones that they got from you wholesale. Okay. So the secondary market, I can see they're available at less than what you said. There's maybe a Mr. Mint premium that you have. He didn't like that, but he had a marketing increment that was added to some of his cards too. So shill bidding does damage to our ecosystem. And unless you've got a service like Card Ladder or other kinds of price guides, take that into account. It makes market manipulation ripe. And I hate that. My whole reason for existence in the hobby was to make a level playing field. And I really tried to do that.
I want to follow up on was the poor listing scenario where the consignment company makes a mistake or maybe a poor picture of the item, that sort of thing. And then the consignor is watching their item perform poorly and they're getting worried. Obviously, I would never, ever condone bidding on your own item. That is against our rules, our ethics in this hobby. But you presented an interesting scenario where you call up your friends and say, hey, Joe, this card, I don't know if you're interested in it, but this might go for a good deal. See people doing this all the time on social media, on Instagram, and that they'll say, hey, this card is available for sale on whichever platform. Go check it out. They're bringing attention to it because the auction company didn't do a good enough job. I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing the information that your card is out there for sale. You might even say it's underperforming because there's an issue with the title and it's too late to change it. I don't have an issue with that. Calling your friend and saying, hey, you might want to go buy this card, and then they decide they want to buy it and they keep it. I don't see anything wrong with that because
my friends are not in the hobby. So they're not tracking it. They're trusting me. And it's not that I betrayed their trust, but I had a code of ethics that didn't allow me to do what was best for them. And I'm trying to explain to them, it just went for what it went with. And so you said it was going to go for more. I said, they left out one word. It was a refractor, and they didn't say it was a refractor, and so it went for way less. And they go, that's not shill bidding, because they don't perceive that as shill bidding. They just think that was a mistake, and I've got egg on my face. I've also had a situation, not one of my auction sponsors, but I had an auction on one of these situations where I did not make a phone call to a friend, hey, these things are going really low. The auction house did.
They do that. I think
No, they called their cronies.
Are the cronies their co-conspirators, or are they their
It's
best
not.
customers?
It's an organized conspiracy. I'm just saying they called their buddies and said, look, this is a really good collection. We don't have as many catalogs out there. These things are going too low. Okay, so they didn't buy them at retail. They bid it up just high enough that nobody else could really scoop it. They got the bids up to half price, 2/3 price maybe. So it was a really good deal for some really good stuff. Again, I don't think that's illegal. These were people that had previewed the auction items, and they were regular customers of this auction. They divvied it up, and I didn't think that was fair. Would I have been the bad guy? I wouldn't have tried to buy it. I just thought when it's sitting there at 1/4 of the price, I just feel bad because I've let my friends down in situations where I was not powerless, but my bag of remedies was not sufficient other than doing things that are, I don't think illegal, but questionable ethically.
Dr. Beckett, he's mentioned Chris Hoge a few times. Chris is one of the founders of Card Ladder. So when you're saying that, Jim, you are referring to the integrity of comps, because they are the purveyor of comps in a lot of ways. And it's a great service, and I use it all the time.
I'm saying Chris is the preeminent comp-ologist. And I used to be, but I'm retired now.
Yeah.
It's wonderful that they allow you to see if it was an auction or a buy it now sale. I'm curious, Dr. Beckett, do you distinguish much between those two types of sales?
I think private sales are the ones that bother me. Private sales, especially when they'll show you a canceled check. And I'm thinking, so what? You know, if it's a public auction with a reputable auction house, but the crooks can beat any system. The more light that's put on it, the better. And Chris is bringing some of those things to light, following up, checking. We did the same thing. It was much smaller in those days. And again, Chris is not checking every single card. It's the ones that stand out. It's the ones that are potential outliers. You just can't throw them out of hand. You need to investigate because it might be a new high score, the new standard, a new threshold. But also it might be funny business.
Let's bring out Chris Hoge from Card Ladder. Welcome back, Chris.
The chief comp-ologist is here.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe it's time to change that Instagram handle again. You've been listening to what we've been talking about. One of the things was the difference between the amount that the hobby should rely on a comp that is based on an auction that is listed properly versus a buy it now. Do we put more stock into either of those comps, or one versus the other?
It gets into the mechanics of each transaction. So buy it now requires a negotiation back and forth between a buyer and a seller. And sometimes there's really not much negotiating at all. It's just the seller posts it at a price and the person buys it. Sometimes there's an offer and there's a little bit of back and forth. But you get to a point where you could argue that the buyer paid their max. But in the context of an auction, the mechanism is different. The price is determined not by the maximum bid of the winner. Instead, it is determined by the maximum bid of the second highest bidder. That's the person who sets the price, and the winning bidder is one increment above that. So you could end up in the context of auctions having situations where the winning bidder would have paid twice as much if there had been a competitor there who was going to drive them up to that price. But because they didn't, they got it for lower. However, that's an oversimplification, because you can also get situations, and I've been in this situation myself as a collector, where, or Jeremy, you were in this situation, I think, on Thursday night, where you'll say, my max is X, and I ain't going over it. And then you get into the heat of the auction, and you're in extended bidding, and all of a sudden, your competitor has gone over your max, and then you throw your max out the window, and you say, I'm going higher now, because partially the juices are flowing, and I'm in the heat of the auction. And then also on the other side, in the fixed price context, it's also possible that you have a shrewd buyer who just actually comes in and negotiates really effectively, and they actually do get to buy it from the seller for much less than their max. They were just able to achieve that because they were a good negotiator. these are two different types of transactions, different mechanisms that underlie them. You really have to scrutinize every comp and take the full context of every comp into consideration.
If I were Chris's age, I'd be doing what Chris is doing, but I'm not. So I did what I did. And the beauty of what I did back in the day was first with annual price guides and then especially with monthly price guides. All we had to do is try our best to get it right that month, knowing that if we're low or we're high in the perception of the dealers or the collectors, there's going to be a recalc. Again, for some of these big cards, they don't come around that much, but the secondary market corrects. The laws of economics are not mocked for long. Eventually, things come back to what it would be. There's a perception that you got an especially good deal on that. Shill bidding and this extreme auction passionate behavior wreaks havoc with the ecosystem and the structure of pricing within the hobby, that if it's too chaotic, people throw up their hands and say, this makes no sense. Chris is trying to have it make sense. I was always trying to have it make sense. And there are exceptions, but you need to be able to explain the exceptions. And we generally could. And I think, Chris, you do a great job of that.